Our reading this morning is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15, verses 1 through 10. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance. Or what about a woman having 10 silver coins? If she loses one of them, does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents.
It's no big secret that I'm prone to losing things. I mean, you've all seen it. You have all seen it too. I remember one time Marie Henry, right in that pew there, handed me a pencil in choir practice. She handed it to me because we were making corrections in our sheet music, and I was supposed to hand it back. There was no interruption in our conversation. There was no interruption in eye contact even. But it vanished. It just vanished. And she's like, it's like a magic trick. Now you see it, now you don't, But here's the weird thing, though. As prone as I am to losing things, I have a talent for finding things, too. And oddly enough, it's rings, people's rings that they've lost that I can find. I've found them on a sandy lake shore. I have found them out in grassy fields with no metal detectors. Cameron once had a ring that he was absolutely sure that he lost in the couch over at the house. And he said, I looked at it. I thoroughly looked through that, and I couldn't find it. And so I got my little headlight on. I've got this little headlamp that I have. And I find things best when there's no other lights on but my headlight. So I went in there. About 5-10 minutes later, I came out with his ring. There was one time at my exercise class, one of my friends lost his wedding ring in the class. And he was kind of panicking about that. And the thing is the rest of the class, there's probably 8 or 9 people in the class, they were looking all over this place that is really no bigger than the fireside room. And it's not a cluttered room whatsoever at all. And so while all these people were looking, I was talking to Sean. I was asking him where he remembers having it last. And so we narrowed it down to what exercise he was doing, where he was in the room, and so and it's funny, while everybody else was running around the room trying to look for it, I sat there in that space, and I just surveyed the room, and then I got up, and I thought, okay, what would happen if it flung off of his finger, or what would happen if it just slipped off and rolled? And so I went up and I walked over towards one of the rowing machines, and this ring had lodged itself in the rubber footing of the leg on this thing. And he says, how in the world did you figure out where that was? And that's a good question, because I would like to know, how in the world can I not find a pencil that was just handed to me? So this week we are considering 2 parables from a series of parables that Jesus told about lost things. The lectionary gives us this week the stories of the lost sheep and the lost coin. They don't have the third parable of that, which is the parable of the prodigal son. I've preached on that other times. Lectionary gives that to us in the springtime. That's fine, because these two, even though they are less known, well known, they're still really good parables. That is until you really think about them. And that's where you're going to run into some pretty big problems that you might get into trouble with if you ask too many questions about them in Sunday school. Not that I would know anything about that. You might see, I don't see anything wrong with these parables. I don't get what you think the problem is, because they're about the joy of finding lost things. You know, kind of like the song we started out this morning. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Pretty simple, right? You wish. I'm gonna warn you right now. Let's just get it out on the table. This sermon is going to focus a lot more on questions than answers. But sometimes that's the best way that we learn, right? Sometimes mulling over questions leads us to find answers, which is appropriate, since our sermon this morning, since our scripture this morning is about finding lost things. So, before we get into the parables themselves, I want to talk about Jesus' audience, because that's one of the things that we've always got to do, is who is Jesus talking to? And that, who the audience is almost as important as the parables that we read about. So this week, Jesus is addressing tax collectors and sinners, along with some scribes and Pharisees who are grumbling because Jesus hangs out with tax collectors and sinners. And you also have to understand, when I say sinners, I am not talking for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God sinners. I mean, we're all in that boat, right? These sinners that Jesus is talking about fit into a specific category. The people in this passage are actual disreputable people who are recognized in their communities as unlawful sinners. Also remember that this takes place right after Jesus shared a bunch of parables about how we need to treat sinners like they are family. In fact, he says in God's kingdom and at God's table, the tax collectors and the sinners are family. Apparently, these grumbling scribes and Pharisees took offense to this, especially when Jesus insisted on practicing what he preached in public in front of everybody. Imagine that. But then grumbling is a national pastime, isn't it? It's a universal thing. We love to grumble. We grumble about our national leaders. That is, unless the leader is one of ours, and then we grumble about the opposition. We grumble about younger generations. This is what I love. My generation, Generation X. I just love it when they talk about generation millennials, the millennials and the Z generation. We say, well, they don't know the value of a dollar. They don't work hard. They don't. They have too much time on their hands, and they play too many video games. They act so entitled. You know what the builder generation was saying about us Gen X kids when we were kids? The exact same thing. Art Ross, in his commentary on this passage, writes, grumbling is a reminder of sin, for sin occurs when God's children are not in harmony with creation and with the Creator. But notice how Jesus is dealing with these grumblers. He's not just writing them off. He's not condemning them. He's not unfriending them or canceling them like we are often do today. He is not tweeting his moral outrage on Twitter. He is actually engaging these Pharisees and scribes. He's taking the time even to share stories that he feels that people might relate to in order to get his point across. Because he wants to move these Pharisees and scribes from grumbling to rejoicing. That's his educational objectives right here. Now let's pick these parables apart, okay? Because, we'll start out with the parable of the lost sheep. This is how it goes. This is what Jesus says. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulder and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost." Okay. Whose fault was it that the sheep was lost? Really, who is this on? Whose problem is it? Because if you're a sheep herder, are you going to put the blame on the sheep? Right? This is on you. You are responsible. You're the responsible party here. The sheep has no agency. The sheep is just a passive object in the story, a non-playable character, if you will. We'd like to blame the sheep. We would like to say, well, this sheep is lost because it made poor life choices. So clearly it's to blame. Just leave it to fend for itself and go take care of the 99 because they're the ones that count because they chose to stay with the flock. If the lost sheep dies, then I guess that's their problem. We wouldn't say that in that case, would we? Maybe. But that's not the reality. It's the shepherd who lost the sheep. And it's the shepherd that has to do the work to find the sheep. Also, is it really wise to leave the 99 other sheep unprotected? Out in the wilderness, wherever they are. Is it good stewardship on the shepherd's part? Sometimes this story is represented in paintings and illustrations, and maybe you've seen these in Sunday school, of a shepherd carrying the sheep over the shoulders back to the flock. Maybe sometimes the shepherd is Jesus coming back. But how many illustrations and paintings do you see of somebody walking away from the flock, and the flock has this look on their faces like, where's he going anyway? How many times do you see that? And here's another thing, this celebration. Jesus said when the sheep herder goes back home with the sheep on his shoulder, he goes home and invites his friends over to celebrate and rejoice over finding the lost sheep. Celebrations usually involve food, especially when you invite people over to your house, right? Okay. What do you think is going to be the main course at a celebration that's hosted by a sheep herder? Pita bread and hummus, stuffed grape leaves and tzatziki? I don't know. These are the kind of questions that got me in trouble in Sunday school, right? So, I don't know. But they're good questions. They're good questions. The parable of the lost coin, let's go on to that. It's similar because the silver coin is one of 10. They called them drachmas. And drachmas represented about one day's wages. Did the missing coin lose itself? No. As one who is an authority on losing things, I can confidently say that the missing coin is the woman's issue, not the coins. Even more so than the sheep, the coin is just a passive object with no agency or autonomy. Unless you're in a Disney cartoon where clocks, tableware, and furniture often get up and walk around and sing, this coin isn't going to just get up and walk away. Amy Jill Levine, who is a Jewish New Testament scholar at Vanderbilt University, asked, what or who is really lost in this parable? Is it the coin or is it the woman? Most of the time, we lose things because of our own carelessness. Here's another consideration. Consideration. The woman in this parable of the lost coin is not one of the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind that Jesus has been referencing over the last 3 or 4 parables. She is not poor. She was not a poor, marginalized outcast. She had 10 drachmas. She had a house. She had friends. She had a community. Her concern, like the shepherd, is to find the piece of the whole that was lost. And unlike the shepherd, though, she does claim responsibility for losing the coin. And then there's the rhetorical who among you question that Jesus puts on the table. If you lost a tenth of your savings or one day's wage, you would certainly search diligently for it, like the woman did. You would light a lamp and you'd take the broom and you would look for it. But if you found it, would you really call your neighbors and have a party? Right? Just think about that. Think about that. It seems like the woman might end up spending the coin to celebrate finding the coin, right? That doesn't make sense. Seems makes about as much sense as the sheep herder who would slaughter a sheep to celebrate finding the lost sheep. This shouldn't surprise us, though, because the last time we read the story of the prodigal son, I suggested that the parable should be called the wasteful or prodigal father. Again, these are the kinds of questions that don't... This is when the supply of Rice Krispie treats just dried up for me in Sunday school, okay? These stories are about the righteous and the sinner. They're about grumbling and rejoicing. Who is the one that needs to be found? It looks like the tax collectors and the sinners had already found Jesus, you know. But even though they found him, they're still considered outsiders. It seems that the righteous, though, are the ones who need to be found, which then begs the question, is it possible to be righteous but still in need of being found? See, in our day and age, here are some questions that we might want to consider. Might the parents who want their children to succeed so much that they wrap their whole lives around baseball games and dance recitals and everything else, could they be lost? Might the career-minded man or woman who's made moving up the corporate ladder their top priority in life be lost? Might the folks who work jobs that they hate just to give their family the things that they never had be lost? Might the senior who has a great pension plan but little sense of meaning since he or she retired, might they be lost? Might the child or the youth who works so hard to be perfect and who is willing to do just about anything to fit in, lost? Here's a tough one. Might the earnest Christian who is constantly asking whether people have been saved or if they've been accepted Jesus into their hearts, could they be lost? That one's a sermon for another day, though. See, I think God's message to us through these parables is, you are mine. You have always been mine. You were created in my image and are therefore connected to me. And because you are mine, I will seek you out wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and bring you back home because I love you so much. Can we be open to that kind of amazing love? Can we accept God's heart for humanity? Can we let down our defenses and our self-doubts long enough to simply receive it and to be engulfed and swept away in this amazing love? Again, these questions are important, and sometimes they are more important than the answers. So I hope that you have some questions to think about this morning.